Uh, Thank you so much, Naj, and thank you to everyone for being here today. My name's Alec Stratford. My pronouns are he, him. I am in Shabuktuk today. Happy to join you for this really important conversation. I'm really happy to start to engage in the conversation that we're about to have because it's a really important one and it ties into Naj's presentation really well. And talking about the shifting dynamics in the role of regulation, how our college is looking to adapt to that new world while staying true to our principles and how we view the world and how we view systems of safety. So I'm going to take some time to lay out the changing nature of regulation, talk about our unique profession and how it ties into that, and then talk about very much beginning stages of the college's building of a safety registry. And I'll unpack that a little bit more as we move forward. So it's important again that we just frame the role of regulation because it is intended to be a system of safety and a system of safety for service users. Every Nova Scotian is entitled to the safe and ethical delivery of professional services, and self-regulation has been the model to achieve that. Regulation is crucial in the delivery of health and social services as it does a number of things. It works to ensure services meet essential safety and quality standards. It confirms professionals in the particular field are competent and qualified. It provides a framework for ethical conduct and what is acceptable within a particular profession, as well as outlines the values and standards for practice. It's meant to build trust between service users and professionals, knowing again that the services they are receiving are being delivered by through mechanisms of safety, quality, competence, and ethical conduct. And ultimately, it provides really important data to identify and implement service improvements, identify risk, and ultimately lead to safer systems. Again, health and social service regulation is really crucial to fostering societal well-being, and enhancements are being made consistently to how we do this. Again, what we have to recognize is that in our current neoliberal structures, with increasing inequality, increasing lack of services that are there to care for folks. And of course, that political divide between the rich and the poor, trust towards regulators, trust towards systems and institutions is on the decline. Again, although regulators are essential in establishing public trust in health and social services, there are rising complaints due to unmet needs in systems that folks are receiving. Of course, staff burnout and the ability to deliver ethical services in our current environment is challenged by resource constraints, managerialism, the divide between the rich and the poor, and the lack of voice, and the lack of first voice in particular, as Naj outlined. We can look at data on this, and this is not unique to Nova Scotia. This is a trend that exists worldwide and is well articulated in the groundbreaking research of Richard Wilkinson and Kate Pickerton, who wrote The Spirit Level, where they do an international jurisdiction study of inequality and its impacts on almost every aspect of our lives, whether it be health and well-being, crime, safety, educational outcomes. What their research very convincingly proves is that societies that are more equal do better in almost every category of well-being. And as societies become more unequal, the less well they do in all of those categories. In Nova Scotia, trust is being impacted by the rising inequality that exists here. Engage Nova Scotia last survey indicated that only 27.1% of Nova Scotians express trust in their provincial governments and their services, and that number continues to go down. Of course, austerity has been a major part of this, where we have continued to see the rise of corporate interests and cost cuttings mechanisms over the need for human connection, undermining professional competence and eroding trust. And of course, as Naj also talked about, our systems are very much focused on an individualistic approach. Looking at how, and responsibilizing an individual for social risks such as unemployment, disability, childcare, home care, instead of taking a collective approach towards that. This again leads to that lack of trust and that lack of safety overall. And of course, many of our systems fail to focus on the structures in which people live in the context of their lives and the social, political, and economic situation that we are currently in, how that impacts our overall health and well-being, how that impacts, again, our relationships with each other, how that impacts issues of equity and racism. We again, still, although there is more attuned to where we are in this process, there is continued to be a lack of a structural focus in terms of the delivery of many of our services. So what this has done in this context where there's decreasing trust among organizations, particularly regulatory bodies, but government institutions in general, is there's been a shifting discourse on what the role of regulation ought to be. That's predominantly driven by that neoliberal lens and ultimately, again, a lack of focus on those structural concerns that lead to that lack of trust. So at this point in time, there have been many calls for redefining what regulation looks like. Again, major reports coming out of British Columbia, Ontario, and Alberta on this, stemming from the UK. But what a lot of these reforms call for is the need to clearly define goals in protecting the public interest. As Naj indicated, and this is something we absolutely support, is the need for public involvement, that first voice involvement in decisions that are made about ethics standards and the care of people. I need to focus on both real and perceived risks. And we're going to talk about risks a little bit more and that language. And a need to proactively address those risks. And of course, this has led to the calls for regulatory reform, some of which are warranted, others which stem from a neoliberal agenda. So we have to remember that self-regulation, as it exists, is a privilege that's granted to professions. And in fact, self-regulation in many other jurisdictions is either almost gone or completely gone, making way for government regulation of professions. Canada is still kind of the last bastion of self-regulation, and it's a privilege that's granted from governments to professions. And it's something, again, that is important to maintaining the independence of that profession, a strong civil society, and the ability to have meaningful collaboration and to ensure, again, that we're making decisions through a democratic process rather than entrenching power in the hands of a few. But again, at the center of this is what is the definition of the public interest? It is a social construct, and it can be defined by many different people based on your worldview, based on your experience, based on where your position in life is. In terms of what we've seen, we've seen a changing definition of what the public interest means. Much self-regulation started to come on board in Canada in the 60s and 70s, when the public interest was tied closely to human rights and the upholding of human rights. As neoliberalism has taken fold, that definition of the public interest is being redefined to focus more on business-focused definition. Alternative regulatory reforms are being explored that shift more of a focus on open competition and cost reduction, and this has contributed to the decline of self-regulatory professions and self-regulation as a model, because again, when self-regulation came in place, of course, the protection of human rights, the delivery of ethical services was primary. And of course, the neoliberal agenda is rooted in reducing regulation so that the free market can have its way. This has become problematic in terms of the role of regulators and how they are meant to protect safety. So the public interest, social construct, what does it mean? From our standpoint and from the purview of where we sit, is the public interest means public safety. All regulators hold common mandates regarding the protection of public interest, maintaining confidence in self-regulation, and upholding integrity in professions. However, defining the public interest is rather nebulous. And of course, the big question is who gets to determine what that is and who doesn't. What does safety mean? What does it represent? And what does it look like? Now, again, in the face of this modernization, we can see some of the real challenges that this neoliberal agenda and regulation has put forward. Again, the dominant discourse treats the neoliberal agenda treats professionals as autonomous actors motivated by self-interest, ignoring the influence of their work environment, social and political context. Of course, this viewpoint contrasts what we know and what the evidence suggests that we are hardwired for, and what neurobiology and social science and political science have all suggested, which that our primary drives are not self-interest. Our primary drives are rooted in empathy and belonging. However, the construct of professionals being autonomous and self-interested has led to a regulatory environment that often pits workers against the clients they serve, distracts from the broader health and social service delivery issues rooted in a lack of funding, complex workloads, complex cases, maintains that power base in a few decision makers who often prioritize marketplace values and uphold systemic biases. When we are fighting each other and not addressing the root of these concerns, that distracts from the necessary attention to client safety and particularly ethical social work practice, the impact of service reductions on vulnerable communities, and the risks posed by austerity and managerialism, and of course the attention that needs to be paid to service user safety, ethical social work practice, and of course its impacts on the most vulnerable communities. What the current context of regulation seems to be pushing for, again, is that individual responsibility, where professionals are held accountable for broader issues and systemic issues like high caseloads, moral distress, burnout, lack of mentorship, training, scarcity of issues, and an erosion of professional autonomy. In this way, again, regulation is used as a term, as a tool of social control aimed at conforming to neoliberal values. Now, again, it's important to note that accountability is key in regulation. And like social work practice, we understand how structures and systems impact an individual's behaviors. And we work to, again, address the behaviors with our service users, as well as build meaning and understanding of how the structures and systems are impacting that. Similar in regulation, accountability is key. The Supreme Court of Canada underscores the need for professional regulation to protect the public, including adherence of registrants to conduct and standards. Individual accountability always must be contextualized against the backdrop of declining public health services, increasing class divide, and eroding trust. What we have to be able to do is to focus on policy to avoid deepening systemic oppression for meaningful, inclusive, and effective health policy. We need to engage and shape public policy in a different way that leads to the safer, ethical delivery of our services and of our systems. So again, some major reform happening in regulation over the last year. The last session of the legislature introduced the Regulated Health Professions Act. Now, I do want to be clear that our act, the Social Workers Act, is governed through the Department of Community Services. So we were not included in this Regulated Health Professions Act. Any of the regulatory bodies that are governed by the Department of Health and Wellness were. And although there are some important measures that were taken in this act, there are also some deeply concerning ones that we have to be conscious of in the current environment and that we exist within. First of all, and one of the I think more troubling aspects of the act is that it took power that was entrenched in the legislature. All of our elected officials voted on individual professional acts, and it entrenched that power into cabinet. and the government itself. Government, the cabinet itself can now decide what professions get regulated, what don't, and what their scopes are. What the objects or the intent of the act was to really make clear that the only role of a regulatory body is public protection and maintaining professional integrity. And there were some organizations that had functions rooted in member support or in some cases advocacy. Those have been stripped. There were no provisions for advocacy or member support in the new Regulated Health Professions Act. Also concerning was the broad powers of the minister that were granted through this act. So the Regulated Health Professions Act gave the health minister extensive powers to intervene in the affairs of regulators, potentially impacting the autonomy and functioning of various health professions. So the environment has changed. There's lots of scrutiny of regulators, which is fair. Again, we are meant to serve the public, and so scrutiny and accountability is important to that. But again, the challenge is the autonomy of that profession. What it stands for, its uniqueness, is compromised by the potential of political interference and the broad intervention powers of the minister that were granted here. So in this new environment, it does challenge us to look at our own mandate and work to strengthen that, as well as to adjust to this environment. So it's important to note that our mandate as the college has remained the same, and we share many of the same objectives as our other regulators, but we differ quite a bit as well. So, of course, our primary objectives is to serve and protect the public interest, to uphold public safety, ensuring that social work practice is the best that it can be and positively contributing to society. Again, as we know, social work has a lot of work to do, as social work has caused a lot of harm, particularly to racialized and marginalized communities. So some of our activities need to be rooted in this as we move forward in our advancement of public safety. There's also a need, and our act also mandates us to preserve the integrity of social work practice, maintaining high ethical standards and promoting professional conduct, and ultimately maintaining public confidence. And we work tirelessly to maintain the public's confidence in the social work profession and our ability to self-regulate. Now, the Social Work Act grants the college a number of tools to which we can enhance safety from. Ultimately, through registration, licensing, professional conduct, all set out in the Act is within our purview, as well as approving and promoting a code of ethics and standards of practice, as well as, again, setting entry-level competency and continuing competency requirements. We have added tools as well to advance and promote the practice of social work in the public interest, to encourage members to participate in the affairs promoting the practice of social work in the best interest of public. And this last caveat and statute is very unique to regulators and very important to how we govern the profession of social work, which is that we have the clear mandate to advocate for the development, enhancement, and promotion of policies to improve social conditions and promote social justice. So this matches, of course, the profession of social work itself. Our profession is rooted in academic discipline, founded on theories of social work, social science, and humanities. It's advanced through an evidence-informed approach and recognizes the importance of Indigenous ways of knowing and practice, the development of knowledge and education, clinical services, policy, and research. Most importantly, and what I think makes social work distinct from other allied health professions is that social work focuses on the person within their environment and recognizes the importance of family, community, culture, legal, social, spiritual, economic influence that impact the well-being of individuals, families, groups, and communities. Social work applies a strength-based approach and views individual families and communities as resourceful, resilient, and having capacity. Again, the lens of social work is so valuable, so unique. It also sets us apart from other professions in that we focus on those structures, on those systems, and how they impact human behavior. Our act similarly provides the college with a tool to regulate through that same lens, to be able to understand the systems and structures that impact professional conduct, that can impact safety, as well as recognizing how the individual fits in all of that. It's really important to our profession that we preserve a way to govern and regulate our profession that is as unique as the profession of social work itself. Again, we can look at the core principles that guide social work as well, and we're always conscious to bring these principles to life as a regulatory body as well, really striving to be responsive to needs, particularly individuals, families, and groups, communities, in organizations and challenges, working desperately to understand and to decolonize our minds, to be clear of our unconscious bias, to be able to provide culturally sensitive, anti-oppressive services. The pursuit of social justice, central to social work, of course, is challenging injustices and advocating for equality. Focus on health and well-being using the social determinants of health, and addressing life challenges and acknowledging the traumas that exist, as Naj laid out for us. And of course, working in collaboration, really key to how we enhance safety and how social work practice as well. So most models of regulation across Canada at this point in time, globally, in fact, are rooted in a right touch regulatory approach. What this means is that we aim to balance risk-based regulation system in line with the standards of good regulation produced by the Nova Scotia Regulated Health Professions Network. What this approach means is that we're looking to strike a balance between protecting public safety and trust without, as Naj also articulated, stifling innovation or imposing unnecessary burdens. Again, the strategy emphasizes minimal intrusion, adaptability to changing circumstances, and exploring alternative mechanisms for risk management. Now, although other regulators don't have the objective to advocate, of course, exploring those alternative mechanisms aligns really well with the college's mandate to advocate for social justice, because it allows us to tackle not just the individual conduct that may pose a risk to this to public services, but it allows us to challenge the structural issues that are impacting professional conduct and influence, again, the ethical delivery of services. Of course, we know that these structural challenges pose substantial risk to the delivery of ethical social work practices. Challenges include moral distress, overwhelming workloads, inadequate funding for social services, and a devaluation of the profession. Comprehensive solutions are required to address these issues, involving policy changes and increased investment in the social service sector. We advocate for policies and are conscious of our voice in trying to lead that change and trying to lead again systemic change towards the more safe services and towards social justice. We have a commitment to social justice that is mirrored in our professional values and that we hope is clearly seen in the activities and programs of the college. And of course, we strive to continue to try and push that public discourse. There's also, again, a major report that many of you would be aware of or know about, which was the Mass Casualty Commission report, which is, and rightly so, influencing the political, social, and economic climate in Nova Scotia, as it should. In the Mass Casualty Commission report, there's a section C19. The perpetrator of this horrific event that occurred was a regulated health professional. So the Mass Casualty Commission, rightly, as a system of safety, provided a chapter on the role of regulators, or what the role of regulators could have been in preventing this horrific event. Again, what the report points to is that there needs to be a unified response to the recommendations regarding the proactive monitoring of health professions and addressing reporting barriers faced by marginalized communities. What the report pointed to is that the perpetrator in this horrific incident was well known well known to be involved in issues of domestic violence, racism, but the community around him, the folks that were being harmed, didn't have the tools, didn't have the connections to be able to report, address, or for the regulator to sufficiently be able to tackle those issues. There's a lot of outreach that needs to be done in terms of reaching marginalized and vulnerable communities, letting them know how our systems of safety operate, encouraging, again, unethical behavior. I think one of the most striking comments in that chapter of the report to me was provided by a community organization who commented that oftentimes you will go into a health professional's office and you'll see written on the wall what is expected of the patient, or what the patient's behaviors ought to be in that situation. But nowhere noted on the walls or in those offices are what a patient can expect of that service professional. And I think that for me, when I read that, was a striking comment on where regulation needs to up its game, how it needs to be accountable to the public, particularly the most vulnerable, and how we need to do much better awareness and engagement. So this is all informing, again, our shifting and changing role and how we operate while maintaining what is true to our profession and to the people that we serve. So what this has led to, and we are involved right now in the creation of the college's next strategic agenda and plan, which will be brought to members for consultation in the new year. But one of the tools that we are looking to develop and look at is what's known as a risk register. And I'm going to talk about some of the problems with that name, but I just want to frame the tool a little bit more. It's becoming a more common practice among professional regulators to do that good proactive risk management through identifying what the risk to service delivery is, what the risk to ethical delivery is. So risk identification is meant to help regulatory bodies identify potential risks in their operations or with the professions they regulate. It's meant to assist in evaluating the likelihood and impact of identified risk, creating priorities in certain areas, and provide a framework for developing strategies to manage and mitigate those risks, and facilitates continuous monitoring and review. And is meant to be a tool that is transparent and accountable, letting the public know how we are working to enhance safety. Ultimately, it's meant to encourage a proactive rather than a reactive approach to risk. It's meant to enable ethical decision-making by regulatory bodies as they work to understand risk, and it's work to improve compliance among both members and regulatory bodies. Now, as we know, and as Naj talked about as well, is that when we frame issues solely on the issue of risk and risk aversion or risk mitigation, that tends to stifle innovation, creativity. And in many cases, you know, as our good colleague Cindy Blackstock calls on us to do, is we have to find the moral courage to take risks in order to change our systems and in order to stand up for the justices that are required and needed. So we have to be very conscious of being too focused on risk in that we do not want to stifle innovation. We also are encouraging members to take risks. That's important to how we change systems. So what we're opting to do is to utilize this tool, but adapt it to our own needs. And as Naj outlined, we want to create and build systems of safety. So instead of talking about this in terms of how do we mitigate risk, we need to talk about it in terms of how do we enhance safety. So it's important to note that there are a number of really core documents that we are grounding ourselves in to conduct this assessment and then build a strategy out. Of course, some of them are well known to all of you. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission report, which provided 94 calls to action, many which are direct calls to social workers in terms of our need to be rooted in reconciliation. The Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls report, extending further calls to action required specifically to address both the genocide of Indigenous people in Canada, as well as working to create a more equal society for genders. Inquiring for Home Colored Children calls on the need for less system-focused and more human-focused services. Of course, I mentioned the Mass Casualty Commission's final report. We also will ground this in some of the college's own reports. So Building a Future We All Deserve, our social policy framework, which provides us with 10 principles to create a more equal and equitable society. Our Repositioning Social Work Practice and Mental Health report, and our Building an Ecosystem for Family and Community Wellbeing report. In addition, we've also taken activities over the last year to do some in-dive and deep dive reviews of our complaints committee decisions. So what are the trends that we're seeing in terms of those risks and where we need to enhance safety, as well as a candidacy review, which Val is going to talk to us about in a little bit. To provide valuable insights in areas as to how we can build and be proactive in enhancing safety. But like social work practice itself, we want to be true to recognizing that there are many interconnecting issues of safety, many interconnecting levels that it exists upon, and that, to Naj's point as well, is that we all have to be responsible and treated as equals in the creation of greater safety in the service of delivery. So in terms of our risk assessment, which will translate into a safety, enhancement of safety, our deep dive into our complaints really highlighted 3 core areas that social workers will often have complaints raised about their conduct. Dignity and worth being a big one, which again is undermined by unempathetic communication, which of course diminishes the dignity and worth of service users. Our ability to communicate empathetically, to actively listen, even in those complex involuntary client situations, is crucial to our profession. And so being able to enhance how we convey empathy, how we communicate, how we relate to the most vulnerable is a really important initiative that we have to dive deeper into. Integrity, particularly professional relationships, have come up quite a bit. Again, making sure that although we take a relational approach to our work, recognizing that social workers are always in a position of power, and that power needs to be utilized in a way that advances the goals of the service user. Again, mismanagement of those professional relationships, either through kind of skirting the line between friendship, service user, supervisor, service user, has an impact in terms of that ethical delivery. So we need to, again, build out our systems of safety on how we communicate, how we take a relational approach while managing our professional relationships, while social workers are always in a position of power. Oftentimes what came up as well is a lack of meaningful supervision, or a lack of engaging in supervision when a social worker was needing to check in, or needing to make meaning from a particular issue, or recognizing that they didn't quite have the competence to resolve an issue and needed to find some support for that. And confidentiality came up fairly frequently in the last 3 years of our complaints, both in written and verbal communications. So again, how do we provide clarity on what the role of confidentiality is, the limits of it, making meaning from, when a disclosure might need to happen, and being conscious of the fact that we live in a digital world where there's digital fingerprints all over the place, and being conscious of that as well. So on a micro level, these are some of the areas that need to be strengthened in terms of safety. And so documenting those with a clear strategy on how to enhance safety is how we're thinking about moving into our next strategic agenda. At the meso level, again, our strategy is going to focus on micro, meso, and macro level approaches. Well, there are a number of areas that came up here. First of all, the understanding of what ethical social work practice looks like, whether it be from community, from employers, from other professionals. That lack of understanding, and again, I think this came out in the Mass Casualty Commission's report, is what do we stand for and what are the standards that service users can expect, need to be very clearly communicated, need to be done with strategic outreach, and need to be done in a way that really prioritize the needs of the most vulnerable and marginalized. Professional identity continues to remain a community level issue that we need to address. We know in complex systems where there are hierarchies and where often the voice of social work is outside of the dominant in terms of our lens and our worldview and our values, that professional identity is constantly being eroded. This is consistent across literature from the United States, from the UK, from Australia, is that social workers struggle to uphold and to have a clear professional identity. There's lots of rhymes or reasons for this. Our broad scope of practice, which is both beautiful and important, also makes it harder to understand what a social worker brings. In addition to that, how social work is portrayed in the media has a major impact here as well. Not just in terms of news and events, but there are, about 1 million shows on doctors and lawyers and nurses, all that seem to take place in Chicago for some reason. That really allow folks to understand who a doctor is, who a nurse is, what a lawyer might bring. In popular media, social work is generally not portrayed very flatteringly. One of the prime examples is from a Disney movie, Lilo and Stitch, in which there is a social worker featured who represents the absolute worst of what child welfare practice looks like. Establishing a clear professional identity at a community level remains a clear priority for how we mitigate risk to the public and how we ensure that we're building safety. And then, of course, supervision and mentorship. Val is going to talk about our candidacy program after lunch, I believe, and its effectiveness in building safety. But it's important that we recognize that good supervision, which often is not provided by social workers, impacts the delivery of safe ethical practice. So how do we enhance that? How do we resonate with employers who are doing administrative supervision that if you want the best out of social work, they need to be supervised by somebody who understands that lens, who brings that good ethical content forward, and who's able to help a social worker make meaning in these complex environments. Similar with our mentorship program, how do we extend and build that out and prioritize that, put the resources in place to make sure that that's there. And then at a macro level, our agenda in terms of being able to advocate for social policies and structures is really crucial here on talking about these macro level risks and how we address them. So, of course, we know, and at this point in time, have to continue to take responsibility for the harm that social work has caused, particularly to racialized and marginalized communities. The enduring impact of our colonial roots, both of the profession and in Canada, have led to the genocide of Indigenous people. So committing ourselves to foster understanding, healing, and reconciliation is a clear area that we have to enhance safety in. Of course, we also need to understand inequity, with the inequity that exists, which is cultivated bias and discrimination. With Nova Scotia's long history of anti-Black racism influenced by white supremacy, we have to be able to start to dismantle both the policies and systems that lead to racism and discrimination, as well as that individual work within ourselves. We are underway with a code of ethics revisioning process, which makes clear that social workers must be working towards reconciliation and must be focused on anti-racist practices is a big part of that. And as we undergo that work towards that, we hope that it'll have an impact to providing greater safety. And of course, we have to remain true to our primary mission as a profession, which is rooted in egalitarianism and humanitarianism and the service to the most vulnerable. Our society is increasingly unequal. The data, even coming out of the pandemic, shows that during that tumultuous time, we saw the impacts of disaster capitalism, in which capitalists were taking advantage of the situation to enrich themselves incredibly. At that point in time, that process needs to end. We need new systems of income distribution, including substantial increases to income assistance, to public housing, to our social services, as well as major increases to the living wages. Unionization is a core part of this, and standing firm that rising inequality provides risks to everyone in our society, and that if we are to build safety, tackling inequality must be at the root of what we take on and challenge. In addition to these broad macro level issues, there are some clear ones too that really impact the ethical delivery of social work practice. For one, the homogeny of the medical model. Again, rooting everything back to a diagnosis and a symptom, rather than being able to look at somebody's health from the perspective of a biopsychosocial spiritual approach, understanding that we are products of our environment, and our social, economic, political, and cultural environments impact our health way more so sometimes than what's going on biochemically in our bodies. We have to continually push through the narrative that healthcare happens between a service user and a practitioner, that health and well-being are rooted in the social determinants of health and the structures that we create. Access to income, access to housing, access to food, access to meaningful social inclusion are all rooted in the ethical delivery of social work practice. And we have to be clear, we cannot continue to rely on an individualistic and outdated model for delivering our healthcare. I would say that obviously our current government's mandate is to fix healthcare. Again, within 4 years, apparently, but yet we've yet to see any clear focus out of this government on the social determinants of health. Without that approach, no one is fixing healthcare, because we're just going to continue to see the fire grow and continue the fire to be fueled while not looking at where the causes of poor health outcomes lie. Managerialism continues to be a major issue that impacts the delivery of ethical social work practice, where we continue to see, particularly in public services, folks in leadership roles who are business oriented, public administrators, not service deliverers. And of course, that is a valuable lens. What we continue to see is the over-reliance on efficiency, on standardization, and that creates a lack of autonomy for social workers and devaluation of the work, which is rooted in human services, human connection, and the capacity to relate to one another. Managerialism continues to be present. We really need to recognize, you can look at child welfare as a clear example, right? Where you look at frontline deliverers need to be registered, as do their supervisors need to be registered. Everyone above that comes from various disciplines, public administrators, finance folks who are making core policy decisions on how child welfare, service to the most vulnerable ought to be delivered, rather than folks with the knowledge of what that practice looks like, the knowledge of what it feels like to sit around the table on someone's worst day and support them in the work that needs to move forward. And of course, one of the major issues that needs to be tackled to continue to ensure safety and service delivery is the upholding of child rights, to which this province has a terrible record in at this point in time. We continue to be one of the only provinces that doesn't have a child youth advocate office, which is essential to upholding those child rights. And as Naj mentioned as well, we're continuing to see a lack of protection for LGBTQ2SIA communities, a continued prevalence of the epidemic of intimate partner violence and its impact on children, and family separation due to poverty. All are prevalent and need to be addressed completely. So as we emerge, moving into our next strategic plan and our next strategic vision in the current regulatory environment, this approach to enhancing safety, being clear on our goals, on how we protect the public interest, being transparent and accountable become really crucial to this exercise, as does, as Naz has mentioned, ensuring that first voice is represented in the decisions that we make and the first people and the people that we serve. As we move forward in crafting our new agenda, there will be opportunities for consultation and feedback. This is really a preliminary overview of how we're thinking about our next strategic agenda at this time. The safety conference was an ideal time to be able to talk about how we as an organization are working to enhance safety and the safe and ethical delivery of social work practice. So I'm happy to end there. I think my timing was pretty decent. Happy to answer questions, hear concerns, any feedback you might have on how we're thinking about our new model, our new strategic agenda.
Thank you so much, Alec. Very grateful and honored to be able to work alongside you and learn from you and learn from our members. So does anyone have any questions or comments? We have the ability to take a few comments and questions right now. Yeah, so Allison, I don't know if it's just you or not. Everyone else, I'm getting a couple of comments saying that they can hear us, so it might just be you. Anyways, does anyone have any questions or comments aside for that? I'm looking at the Q&A. One question here. I'm hearing you mention the negative perspective of social workers that is depicted in the media. I've certainly noticed the same. I'm also hearing the areas of development that is required to decolonize our work. I'm wondering what, if any, steps are being considered by the Nova Scotia College of Social Workers to promote the great work that individual social workers are doing to resist the oppressive structures that they are working, like child protection. It might be helpful to have a dialectic approach to decolonizing social work. That is to say that we could challenge the structure of social work, but recognize the inherent strengths of individual social workers. And there's already all these smiles. So I want to just say, I was so impressed the very first time that I came to, I don't know if I need to, like, I'm trying to, I don't know. I was very impressed that there was the ability to celebrate social workers. Our awards gala, the very first awards gala that I participated in 2021 was celebrating social workers that specifically did exactly that. And I don't know if people are using their awards, but that's one way that we are, and we're going to be highlighting them in our next issue, specifically social workers who have sometimes left jobs specifically because of that, others that have changed their systems from within. So that's one way that we are celebrating and advancing that narrative. There are many others.
Yeah, I do want to say too that in terms of child welfare, the president of the college, Lynn Brogan, and I had our first meeting with the new Minister of Community Services yesterday, as well as the new Deputy Minister. And to Naj's point, our awards, we really look to do just that. And one of the things that is clearly noted to us is that as long as I've been the executive director, we have never had a child welfare social worker nominated for an award. I flagged this yesterday, as did Lynn, for both the deputy minister and minister of community services, saying that if we are to actively change the public image of child welfare, this is a really simple step that you can do as an employer, is to nominate your best, nominate the folks that are doing this work so that we can profile them in a way that demonstrates what the best of child welfare practice looks like.
So that was a great question. You mentioned public education about the role of social workers. We have a strategy to that outline. We welcome everyone's participation in every committee. Our communications committee is actually would love some more ideas. We're in the middle of recontextualizing how we're going to be delivering our magazine and communication. So that would be a phenomenal one. Please reach out to me if you're interested. That's a great example of how we're trying to like reframe how people think of social workers, how social work thinks of itself. Our social justice committee is looking at advocacy to change the policies within which social workers work. Our professional development committee is looking at education, specifically around intersectional bias and internalized bias to make social work safer. And then our professional standards and ethics committee is looking at how can we develop guidelines to support social workers in transforming this. All right, a question has come from our engineer. Have you used the risk prioritization risk prioritization number to break down the components of risk severity, detectability, and frequency? And that is an example why we need engineers. And Mark is going to be speaking at 2 p.m. As part of our interprofessional panel on safety. I don't know, Alec, if you've used the risk prioritization number, but I know.
I mean, yes and no. Again, we haven't quite nuanced it down. I can tell you, like in complaints, right, is that there are some much clear, again, a right touch regulatory approach looks to look at risk and put in regulation that is proportional to that risk. I would say our biggest severity of risk are those professional mismanagement of professional relationships. Right, this is really where things go awry for social workers when they extend beyond the professional relationship with clients, either towards friendships, in some severe cases, relationships. That is certainly, in terms of that micro level risk, something that is a priority. In terms of the macro level risks, there are so many ultimately that that can be prioritized. My worldview and experience is that we have to continue to prioritize tackling inequality. It is again really, really tough to legislate against hate, to legislate towards inequity. Hate and inequity are products of inequality, and we can effectively legislate against inequality through tax measures, through redistribution of wealth, through programs and services. So again, in terms of numbering the priority list, yeah, this is part of the activities that will happen as we outline more clearly what our safety registry will look like. Ultimately, we will use data in terms of quantity and frequency of complaints, but ultimately we recognize that those micro level professional conduct issues are rooted in those broader system issues, so we have to maintain a clear focus there as well.
And I would say that we live and work in white supremacy and in colonial structures that contribute to certain beliefs that cause harm to all people, that lead to the ways in which we are burning out at significant levels, and the ways we are even talking about data. Right now, we're talking about individual data. But if we look, for example, at the number of people on leave,
yep,
and what that means, why are people on leave, and what is going on in terms of retention and safety issues, because then you have people who are left picking up the pieces, who are doing the job of 8 people because no one wants to work in specific areas because they experience severe moral distress. Our data is showing that 98% of social workers working in mental health in Nova Scotia experience severe moral distress because they are being asked to do jobs that they know cause harm. Cognitive behavioral therapy might work for some people, but for other people, especially if they are neurodivergent, it causes harm. So if there's a policy that's saying, do this, and we know that it's causing harm, then we are experiencing severe moral distress, which causes that burnout. So there's so many other factors to look at, and the way we utilize data is so complicated. But if we can look at systems, that's why it's so good to have an engineer, because there's systems. Why don't we have the exact same components of safety mechanisms and investment and strategies that we have for something like airplane travel? If we looked at safety around the dedication and protection of children and recognize their rights to be safe and the rights of workers to be safe, there's so many components to this. The communication.
I would just add too, last year, and we just got data out of the Department of Community Services, to Naja's point, there were 124 resignations. That represents 30% of the child welfare workforce. That most we've ever seen. That is a product of moral distress and moral injury that's rooted in those systems. That has to be challenged and tackled in a comprehensive way, as not fruitful to the delivery of services to the most vulnerable. Anyone who's practiced child welfare knows the strain and stress of the job, how complicated it is, but that can be resolved in a number of different ways. Should we, again, get good buy-in from political decision makers and those with power, and it's on us to hold them accountable to that as well.
So we are going to be having, at the end of our day, we're going to be, can you please repeat the number of resignations?
Yeah, it was 124, and that was in the province's fiscal year. The province's fiscal year runs from April to March. So from April of 2022 to March of 2023, 124 resignations.
Thank you. And in the chat, there's the comment that there's a tremendous love of the job. The client work is great. It's the larger systems that are causing the moral distress. And that's really, we recognize this, and there's we're going to be looking at all of the factors that can contribute to it. So after lunch, we're going to be talking about candidacy, mentorship, supervision, ways that we can be protecting and supporting one another. Then we're going to have an interprofessional panel, ways that we can be collaborating with each other, learning from each other. We each have different skills and experiences. For example, we need to be thinking maybe even outside of healthcare to look at how to transform the work that we're doing. And then how can we be looking at advocacy? So we're going to end our day with advocacy and our new and improved toolkit that we're getting ready to launch. So I'll be talking to you about that as well. And it's a much more complicated system, takes all of us, but I know I'm really grateful to be working in such a progressive environment where I'm learning from each of you, your wisdom, especially if you're joining our committees. That's that's inspiring me. And I know Alec probably shares this as well, and Val as well. We are inspired by all of you and the work that you're doing, and we're here to support you. So it is 12 p.m. Please have lunch, and I'm going to stop recording, and we will continue at 1 with Val speaking about candidacy, and then our interprofessional panel, which will include doctors and an engineer, to talk about how we can rethink safety from multiple lenses, and then we will end on advocacy. And again, this is just the beginning of hopefully the conversations that will lead to our evaluation plan, our strategic plan, our vision for the future. How can we work together to make a safer, unceded Mi'kma'ki for everyone?